Welcome to Ziffity Quick Chat.
Want the simplicity and effortlessness of a B2C experience. Offline manual process and move it online. It doesn't replace going into the warehouse these are long-term relationships. 50% increase in conversion rate and 100% increase in the average order value.
Maybe a brief intro, maybe tell our listeners who you are, how you got to play this role, and then we can get into the details of the discussion today, which is mostly around B2B practices and technology.
Yeah, of course. Hi, Marco. Thank you so much for having me on today. As you said, I am the general manager of B2B here at BigCommerce. I look after the success of wholesalers, manufacturers, distributors on the BigCommerce platform. And for anyone who isn't familiar with BigCommerce, we are a SaaS e-commerce platform focusing on enterprise manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, and suppliers. I've been at BigCommerce for coming up to 2.5 years now. I actually joined originally to look after our acquisition of Feedonomics, which is a fantastic platform for syndicating product data to ad channels and to marketplaces. It's the best platform out there, used by 35% of the IR 1000. Really incredible platform, and used by some incredible B2B businesses as well. But I transitioned into the role I'm in today. At BigCommerce, we appreciate just how big the opportunity is for B2B merchants, manufacturers, distributors to move online. And we have the perfect platform for helping them do that. And I'm really excited to be helping drive that digital transformation in this industry with such a great team here at BigCommerce, dedicated purely to manufacturers and distributors, building fantastic products that no doubt we will dive into in a little bit more detail.
The topic for today is how B2B stores can take on challenges involving the purchase process, which is, as we know, slightly different and slightly more complicated than it is for the direct-to-consumer space. And while the e-commerce tools and platforms for B2B have evolved a lot over the last few years, I think there's still a gap between these tools and the actual operational processes that B2B distributors have to carry on in order to take advantage of these tools. And as consumer expectations grow consistently, these businesses that perhaps were traditionally mostly held offline and are now making the transition have to put a little bit more thought and effort into establishing a more than just a buy-sell relationship with customers. And I think an important part of the challenge is acquiring a new customer base. A lot of these businesses have an existing portal type interface where existing customers know to log in to look for their information or make purchasing decisions. But as websites become more advanced, the interaction between humans and websites is also changing over time. The expectations that you have as far as how quickly these load, how intuitive the interfaces should be. A lot of these B2B merchants, I think, have to start transitioning somehow from the traditional portal experience to a more consolidated, leaner, more intuitive purchasing experience online that may be more akin to the direct-to-consumer experience that we're used to nowadays, although with specific nuances and tools for the B2B space. I think there's different parts of the process of the B2B purchasing process that tools and platforms like BigCommerce can cater to, and we'll step through some of those today. But yeah, I think as far as
I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there, which is that the digitally native buyer has a different expectation than the buyer that came before.
Mm-hmm.
And that buyer is used to being able to interact online with their merchant, with whoever's selling product to them. And that's what they do in their personal purchases, for their personal purchases. And they expect a similar experience when it comes to purchasing on behalf of a business. And we hear a lot about, B2B buyers want a B2C-like experience. And the way I really think about it is B2B buyers want the simplicity and effortlessness of a B2C experience, but they still have all of the demands and complexity of the B2B process. And we'll probably dive into that in a little bit more detail later. But I think this morning, my dog had chewed through his Bene bone and I needed to buy a new one. It was 2 clicks on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
So simple, so fast. That's the simplicity that we want to bring to B2B. The process shouldn't be cumbersome. It shouldn't be laborious. And what we really believe is the future of manufacturing and distribution sales is true omni-channel. So regardless of where you're interacting, maybe this is a manufacturer of construction materials, right? So I might purchase online for a delivery. I might go into the warehouse. I might phone up and speak to a salesperson to get that order through. I might be trying to place a quote, right? A quote request. Regardless of kind of where I interact, all of that information should be available online. And so we take some of that kind of offline manual process and move it online. It doesn't replace going into the warehouse to make a purchase. It doesn't replace phoning the sales team, but it makes the follow-up easier and more and simpler and more streamlined. I think that's what merchants are trying to achieve, and it's what buyers want them to get to, because it's simpler for everyone.
Totally agree. And I think that's a great segue into the first question that we had here, which is just what are some of the things that make the business to business purchase more complicated or complex compared to the direct to consumer? So maybe Lance, you can tell us a little bit about, the handful of differentiators between that purchase process and what complexities that introduces. And then we can step into talking about how the tech solves for those complications.
Yeah. And it starts by understanding this buyer journey. Understanding the differences in the buyer journey is how manufacturers, distributors can move business online. When they understand how buyers are finding their products, the information that they want, how they then want to check out and purchase. But I think a great place to start, we take my example from this morning, right? I bought a chew toy for my dog. I made that decision in about 3 minutes. I made the purchase in under a minute. There were no approval workflows needed. My payment method was credit card. It was very, very simple. No one else was involved in the transaction. It's one time. Admittedly, my lifetime value on Amazon is pretty high, I think, but it's nowhere near as high as a manufacturer of construction materials is with their contractors that are purchasing products. And then if we compare that to, let's use that example of a house builder who is purchasing from a manufacturer of construction materials, in order to determine the products that needed to be bought, there were multiple people involved. There were designs made, and those designs led to purchase orders for an amount of material that were probably reviewed by 1, 2, 3, 4 maybe many people. If this was a commercial building, those purchases would have been reviewed by many, many people before that order was placed. When I'm placing the order, depending on how important a customer I am, I may get different pricing. I get pricing that I've negotiated. If I'm a large house builder, commercial builder, and I'm using this manufacturer, their products on multiple sites, I've probably negotiated pricing that may have been in effect for years. And I expect to get that pricing for all of my projects, maybe across the country and across any warehouse that I'm getting these products from. That complexity does not exist generally in B2C, but it exists everywhere in manufacturing and distribution. I think here at BigCommerce, right? If I want to make a purchase of a new piece of software, I don't go online and put my credit card details in. I go into a system, I fill out a procurement request that goes off to our procurement team. They have specific limits on what could be spent, budget limits, specific ways that we would need to pay for it, right? They need to get a purchase order that needs to then be approved. There's a long process that needs to be followed. And that's true across most of manufacturing and distributing. And with commerce, none of that changes. You still have all of those processes. We're just bringing them online where we can and making that journey more seamless.
What about the very beginning of the purchase flow, which usually involves research, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what that usually looks like for a B2B merchant, and what are some of the, either in general, techniques that you have found to be successful, or perhaps a little bit more specifically, what are some of the tools or tactics that tech like BigCommerce can provide to help in that initial part of the process, which is just finding out what's out there, what are what's the pricing landscape, and what are the options before they even start negotiating, before the entire approval process gets introduced. Could you talk a little bit about that piece, the research piece?
Yeah, that's a great point. I sort of missed that. You're right. I purchased that bone for my dog. I did zero research. I typed it into Amazon, I clicked buy, and that was it. Of course, in B2B, there is a lot of research often that is going into the products that are going to be purchased. That's true for distributors of safety equipment and those manufacturers of building materials. And what we found, and we actually recently at BigCommerce here did a survey of just over 1,000 B2B buyers, and we asked, where does your product research start? And unsurprisingly, it starts the same place as the majority of product research, B2B or B2C, which is on search engines. It starts by typing into Google. Let's be honest, Google is the number one search engine out there. Into Google, I am looking for a brand new desk setup for my office. I am looking for this type of safety equipment for my factory. That's how it starts. And so if that's where the majority of research is starting, manufacturers, distributors, B2B businesses need to think about how are they going to appear in those searches. And that generally fits into sort of two buckets. One, SEO, search engine optimization, and two, paid for advertising. And you need to be on top of both, right? So SEO is all about having fantastic content in your pages, making sure that you've got the right links, you've got the right setup, the right site maps, etc. From a BigCommerce perspective, that's sort of out of the box. You have to do the content, but in terms of making sure your website is set up in the correct manner, it's out of the box. The paid piece, that's where it's a little bit different, right? You have to think about cost per click and how much are you willing to pay for adverts on a search engine. And maybe you're putting your products onto something like a Google Shopping, right? So that you're going to appear right at the top of that search. And in that case, you've got to get your data from wherever it lives. That could be in a PIM, it could be in BigCommerce, it could be in an ERP into Google, and that's where something like a Feedonomics becomes very, very, very valuable, because they are the best platform at taking that data, transforming it into the right formats for the highest performance on a Google, and then getting the data into the platform. And a lot of people, a lot of merchants don't think about this. And there's a great example with Nike, right? If you go on to, and this is a B2C example, but we can have shoe distributors out there. If you go onto the Nike website and you look at a shoe, the title for that shoe, well, it just says Nike. In fact, it won't say Nike. It'll say Zoom, Air, whatever the name is. That's about it. And that's because you're on their website. You're on the Nike website, so they don't need to put the brand name in there. And you are selecting the size and the color and the gender in the site. You know that you're already there. And so their product information that's on the site may not be the information that you need to be performant on Google. So when you send that over to Google, it needs to know the brand, it needs to know the gender, it needs to know the size, and it needs to know the color. If you don't put that information in and add it in, you're not going to be performant. And so this is particularly true for manufacturers out there, right? On your website, that information is maybe built into categorization, but it's not necessarily built into the product information on the store. And so you need to find a way to transform that data and get it into the search engine, let's say Google Shopping, in the right format, so it can be performant, and that you're going to get the clicks that mean that you rise to the top, you bubble to the top of Google's rankings, and that you're paying a lower cost per click. In the example I just gave, the Nike shoe that is sent to Google without without the brand, without the gender, and without the size, and then when you compare that to the shoe that is sent with all of that information, the cost per click halves. It's a huge saving in terms of your cost of advertising. And so I always think it kind of, it starts there. But, once you've figured out, okay, I've got my SEO strategy, I've got my paid marketing strategy, you really have to think about what value add are you providing to your customer, to your buyer? And it's all about education, right? If you're looking at building materials and you're doing research, does your website as a distributor, does it have the information that I'm looking for as a buyer to better understand this product, right? To better understand the dimensions, the value, how it is better than other products, comparison. And so we always talk about educating the buyer, and that's really key in this journey as well. When you're attracting customers in, make sure you're educating them, right? They'll come back if you're able to impart wisdom.
So then let's step from the research part of the purchasing process over to the next point of complication that you mentioned, which is approvals, right? The approvals process, which may involve multiple stakeholders within the organization of the buyer. Likewise, can you tell us a little bit about what's some advice, some generic advice that you would give to B2B merchants for simplifying their approval process, and then perhaps a little bit more specifically, what can BigCommerce do to alleviate some of those pain points?
Yeah, for sure. So you've attracted the customer in. Hopefully you've educated them. They've watched your product demonstration videos. This is the junior buyer who's doing the research, right? That's who's probably doing the research. They're the junior buyer. They don't actually have purchasing power. Right. They did you've educated them. They've seen all your fantastic information about maybe an HVAC system that you're selling, and now they have to go to their manager with the detail and ask for approval to make the purchase. Quite just as you said, and you can go and you look at Forrester and Gartner. They both have reports that will say there are up to 10 approvals needed for B2B purchases. And today, for merchants that haven't built their own approval, so for manufacturers, distributors out there who haven't built an approval flow into maybe their site, their buyers are doing this in email. Right? They just send off an email to the manager that says, hey, can you respond yes and approve this purchase, all offline. Maybe it's in spreadsheets. There could be e-procurement systems. I mentioned, at BigCommerce, we have that sort of system where I submit a request, an approval comes back, and then maybe it is happening online. Maybe the distributor you're purchasing for has built all of that in. The way that you as a B2B merchant should think about this is, how do you insert yourself into the right places in that approval journey? That approval workflow, right? And where is that happening? So what value add can you provide? And that's an interesting discussion. I always tell B2B merchants to sit down with their buyers and understand that journey first before diving headfirst into building something. If you haven't really understood what the majority of your buyers, how the majority of your buyers purchase, you may build something or do something that they'll end up not really using, right? And so if 90% of your buyers are using some e-procurement system, you have to make sure that you're in that system. Whether that's Coupa, Ariba, whatever it might be, make sure that your products are on that system and that they can purchase through that system. So with BigCommerce, we partner with TradeCentric, who will effectively pump your product into Coupa, Ariba. In fact, they provide a window. It's punch out. They provide a window into your store. And then all of that workflow just can sit in that system, nice and easy. Or maybe if you're selling to smaller businesses, they would actually love if you in your site could build some of that workflow and build those approvals. And then you could think about bringing it into your site, maybe having roles and permissions and allowing your buyers, that junior buyer, to put items into a cart and then send them off to their to their manager to approve and purchase, all built into your site. And so lots of different options there for merchants, but it starts with understanding the majority of that buyer workflow.
For sure. So perhaps for those listening who may not know, because I know this is something that took me a little bit to understand at first when I first came across this concept, the concept of punch-out catalogs. Could you give us a very brief just description of what that is for anyone who may not be familiar with what it is and how that works?
Yeah, for sure. So if I have an e-procurement system, a punch-out catalog is effectively a view into your site or into your catalog where the buyer views your catalog, selects the items that they wish to purchase, and then punches out back into their e-procurement system, and that's where the purchase flow then occurs. And so with to speak, specifically to how this happens within BigCommerce, and we have many merchants who have set up punch out for their customers that are using systems like Coupa and Ariba. Their buyer logs into their e-procurement instance, and they will select to view this manufacturer's, this distributor's store, and they will be shown effectively their BigCommerce storefront, and they will add items into the cart. But instead of then checking out, when they get to the checkout, they don't. They punch out. And those items are taken back into the e-procurement system. And then the purchase is completed in that system. The data, once the purchase is completed, the order flows back into BigCommerce. So there's no lost data there. There's no lost information. The order flows back through. But the approval process can then happen in that e-procurement system. So the junior buyer built the cart, took it back into their e-procurement system, and then pinged their boss and their manager to say, hey, the cart's ready, please can you approve it? And for larger businesses out there, a lot of them are using this sort of system to manage their purchase workflow.
Very cool.